I'm not sure how to begin this, but here goes. My name is John, and until recently I thought I had a decent life, a solid marriage, good friends, and the kind of predictability that keeps you grounded. My wife, Amy, and I have been together for 10 years, married for 7. I thought we were happy. Maybe not the fireworks every day kind of happy, but comfortable, solid. Or so I thought. It all started about 3 months ago when Amy's behavior began to shift. At first it was little things, staying late at work more often, new outfits that didn't seem like her usual style, and the way she guarded her phone like it was the holy grail. I'm not the paranoid type. I chalked it up to stress or a new project at work. But then, I caught her smiling at her phone one evening while we were watching TV. When I asked what was so funny, she said it was just a meme from her coworker. That was the first red flag. I ignored it, convincing myself I was overthinking. Amy was always the responsible one. She wouldn't. No, I wouldn't even let the thought cross my mind. Then came the night that changed everything. Amy had a work dinner, her third in 2 weeks. She kissed me goodbye, smelling of perfume she hadn't worn in years, and told me not to wait up. Something about the way she looked at me felt off, like she was trying to convince herself she wasn't doing anything wrong. I told myself to trust her, but a small nagging voice in my head wouldn't shut up. When she didn't come home until 2 a.m., I decided I needed to know what was going on. That's how I ended up buying a small surveillance camera off the internet the next day. It felt wrong, sneaky, but I had to know the truth. I installed it in the living room where Amy often sat, saying she needed some alone time to unwind after work. 2 days later, my world began to crumble. The first night after setting up the camera, I felt sick to my stomach. I didn't want to catch anything, I wanted proof that I was wrong. I hoped I'd feel like an idiot for even suspecting her, that I'd see her scrolling through TikToks or texting her sister. But a part of me knew. That night, Amy came home late again. She was quiet, distant. When I asked how her day was, she gave me a quick fine and went straight to the shower. I sat on the couch pretending to watch TV, but my mind was racing. After she went to bed, I grabbed the camera's SD card and locked myself in my car to watch it. I felt like a criminal, but I had to know. The footage started off normal. Amy on the couch with her phone, sipping wine. She scrolled for a while, then started typing furiously. I couldn't see the screen, but the smile on her face was like a knife in my chest. She hadn't smiled like that at me in months. She paused, looked around as if checking if anyone was there, then got up and grabbed a second wine glass. That's when I heard it, the soft knock at the door. The footage shook as my hand trembled, but I kept watching. Amy opened the door to a man I didn't recognize. He was tall, well-dressed, and younger than me, maybe mid-30s. She smiled wide, the kind of smile I used to think was just for me. He leaned in and I could swear he kissed her cheek. They sat on the couch, talking and laughing like they'd known each other forever. He touched her hand once and she didn't pull away. My stomach churned. The footage didn't show anything too damning, but it was enough to confirm my worst fears. Amy wasn't at work late, and she wasn't just having dinner with coworkers. There was someone else, and she was comfortable enough to bring him into our home. I didn't sleep that night. The next morning, Amy acted like nothing had happened. She kissed me on the cheek before heading to work, and I stood there frozen, wondering how she could look me in the eyes after what I saw. I wanted to scream, to demand answers, but I didn't. I wasn't ready. I needed more proof. I spent the day replaying the footage in my mind, dissecting every moment. Who was this guy? How long had this been going on? I thought about confronting her that evening, but something stopped me. What if she lied? What if she turned it around on me? I had to be sure. So, I waited. That night, I told Amy I had to work late. I wasn't working though, I was parked down the street in my car watching our house. The paranoia was eating me alive. Sure enough, around 9 p.m. I saw a car pull up. It was him. The same man from the footage. I gripped the steering wheel so hard my knuckles turned white. He got out, straightened his tie and strolled up to the door like he belonged there. I watched as Amy opened it, greeted him with the same bright smile and let him in. I sat there for what felt like hours, staring at the lit windows of my own home, where my wife was entertaining another man. My chest felt tight, my hands were clammy, and I couldn't think straight. Every instinct told me to burst in and confront them, but I stayed put. I needed more. I needed undeniable proof. That night was the longest of my life. Sitting in the dark, staring at my house, I felt like a stranger to my own existence. My marriage, the life Amy and I had built together, it all felt like a lie. I kept telling myself to storm in, to end this charade, but I froze every time my hand touched the door handle. I eventually drove away, my mind spinning with what I'd just witnessed. The man inside my house was confident, too comfortable. He wasn't just some fling or casual mistake. This was something deeper, something Amy had chosen over me. I felt sick. I went to a 24-hour diner instead of home. The thought of going back, of pretending everything was normal, was unbearable. As I sat there, nursing a cup of coffee that had gone cold, I tried to piece together the timeline. When had she changed? How long had this been going on? I kept replaying little moments over the past year. Cancelled date nights, unexplained texts, the sudden interest in working late. The waitress asked if I was okay, and I must have looked terrible because she brought me a slice of pie on the house. I thanked her, but I couldn't eat. All I could think about was Amy, laughing on our couch with that guy. When I finally got home, it was well past midnight. The house was quiet, the living room dark. I tiptoed upstairs and found Amy asleep in bed. For a moment I just stood there, staring at her. How could she sleep so peacefully after what she'd done? I lay down beside her, but sleep wouldn't come. My mind raced with questions. Was I not enough for her? Did she ever love me? Was this man offering something I couldn't? The idea of Amy being intimate with someone else in the house we shared, it burned like acid in my chest. The next morning I was a wreck, but Amy acted as if everything was fine. She hummed while making coffee, asked about my day, and even kissed me before leaving for work. It was surreal, like living in an alternate reality where only I knew the truth. That evening I reviewed the footage from the camera again. This time I caught something new, a brief moment where Amy leaned in closer to him. Their hands brushed and he held hers. Then, in a moment that shattered what little hope I had left, he kissed her. It wasn't a casual kiss either. It was deliberate, passionate, the kind of kiss you'd expect from someone in love. I had seen enough. But I didn't confront her, not yet. I needed to know who this man was. If Amy wouldn't tell me the truth, I'd find it myself. I started small, looking at our shared phone records. Amy's number was linked to a single number more than any other. I copied it down and ran it through a reverse phone lookup. What came back wasn't just a name but an identity that made my blood boil. The man's name was Marcus. He wasn't just some random guy. He worked with Amy, one of her new colleagues she'd mentioned in passing months ago. A great addition to the team, she called him. I remembered jokingly asking if he was single, and she laughed, brushing off the question like it was absurd. Suddenly everything made sense. The late nights, the guarded phone, the sudden shift in her behavior. It wasn't work keeping her late, it was Marcus. Armed with this new information, I debated my next move. Confrontation was inevitable, but I wanted to be smart about it. If Amy was going to lie, and I knew she would, I needed undeniable proof to call her out. That's when I decided to go all in. I hired a private investigator. It felt extreme, but at this point, I didn't trust my own emotions to handle things clearly. If I confronted her without solid evidence, she could manipulate the situation, turn it back on me, or worse, deny everything and make me doubt my sanity. The PI was a no-nonsense guy named Greg. He didn't ask questions or pry, he just took the details and assured me he'd get what I needed. I felt a strange mix of guilt and relief as I handed over Amy's schedule and Marcus's information. I hated that it had come to this, but I couldn't let her keep making a fool out of me. The next few days were torture. Every time Amy smiled at me or made small talk, I felt like screaming. I hated the lies, the betrayal, but most of all I hated that I still loved her. Despite everything, some part of me clung to the hope that there was an explanation, that she'd come clean and beg for forgiveness. But deep down I knew better. 3 days later, Greg called with his first update. His tone was professional, but I could hear the pity in his voice. He'd followed Amy and Marcus to a hotel. They'd been there for over 2 hours before leaving separately. Greg said he'd send the photos, but I didn't need to see them. My stomach churned just imagining it. I thanked him and hung up, my hands shaking. This was it. The proof I needed. The photos arrived the next morning, and I couldn't bring myself to open them right away. The email sat in my inbox like a bomb waiting to go off. I stared at the subject line, surveillance report, Amy and Marcus, for what felt like hours before finally clicking. There they were. The images were undeniable. Amy and Marcus walking into a hotel, side by side. Amy smiling at him in a way that made my stomach twist. Marcus holding the door open for her. The timestamps didn't lie either. They were there for over 2 hours. The photos didn't show anything explicit, but they didn't need to. I knew what happened inside. The betrayal felt like a physical wound. My hands shook as I closed my laptop, and for a while I just sat there, staring at the wall. This was it. There was no room for doubt anymore. Amy wasn't the woman I thought she was. That night, I decided it was time to confront her. I couldn't live like this, pretending, waiting, hoping. I needed answers, and she needed to face the truth. Amy came home around 7 p.m., the same as usual. She greeted me with a kiss on the cheek, and I felt a wave of disgust. How could she act so normal after everything she'd done? I tried to keep my voice steady as I asked her to sit down. "We need to talk," I said. She froze for a moment, her smile faltering. "What's wrong?" My chest tightened as I looked at her. "You tell me, Amy. What's wrong?" Her eyes darted away, and she shifted uncomfortably in her seat. "I don't know what you're talking about." I reached for my laptop and opened the email, spinning it around so she could see the screen. The photos were right there, staring back at her. "Explain this," I said, my voice shaking with anger. Amy's face went pale. She stared at the screen for a long moment, then looked up at me with wide eyes. "John, I can explain." "Don't you dare lie to me," I snapped, my voice rising. "I gave you the benefit of the doubt for months. I trusted you. And this is what you do. Sneaking around with him." Tears welled up in her eyes, but I wasn't moved. "It's not what it looks like," she stammered. I laughed bitterly. "Not what it looks like. So you weren't sneaking off to a hotel with Marcus? You weren't smiling at him like he's your husband? What part of this am I misunderstanding?" She wiped at her tears, her voice breaking. "It was a mistake, John. I was going to end it. I swear. End it." I repeated, my voice dripping with disbelief. "How long has this been going on?" Amy hesitated, and that hesitation told me everything I needed to know. 6 months, she finally admitted, barely above a whisper. 6 months. Half a year of lies. Half a year of her coming home to me after being with him. I felt like the floor had been ripped out from under me. "Why?" I asked, my voice softer now, almost pleading. "What did I do wrong, Amy? Was I not enough for you?" "It's not about you," she said quickly. "You're an amazing husband, John. You've always been there for me. I don't know why I did it. Marcus, he was just what?" I cut in. "Exciting? New? Better?" She shook her head, tears streaming down her face. "No, it wasn't like that. He made me feel noticed. Like I mattered. I've been feeling disconnected, and I didn't know how to tell you. It was stupid, and I hate myself for it." Her words hit me like a punch to the gut. Disconnected? I thought we were fine. Sure, we'd had our ups and downs, but nothing out of the ordinary. Or so I'd thought. I stood up, unable to sit still any longer. "You should have told me, Amy. You should have talked to me instead of running to him." "I know," she said, sobbing now. "I was scared. I didn't want to hurt you." I laughed bitterly again. "Well, you've done a great job of that." The room was silent except for her crying. I felt drained, like I had nothing left to give. "You need to pack a bag," I said finally. Amy looked up, her face crumpling. "John, please." "No," I said firmly. "I can't do this right now. You need to leave." She started to argue, but I held up a hand. "Go stay with a friend or a hotel or wherever. I need space." Amy nodded, defeated. She got up and went upstairs, and I listened as she packed a small bag. When she came back down, she stopped in front of me, her eyes pleading. "I love you, John. I don't want to lose you." I didn't respond. I couldn't. As the door closed behind her, I felt an overwhelming mix of emotions: anger, sadness, betrayal. But most of all, I felt empty. When the door closed behind Amy, the silence in the house was deafening. I stood there for a while, staring at nothing, unsure what to do next. Everything felt surreal, like I was living someone else's life. Her words echoed in my mind: "I love you, John. I don't want to lose you." They felt hollow, a desperate attempt to undo what couldn't be undone. I went to the living room and sat on the couch, the same couch where I'd watched her laugh with Marcus. The memory made me sick, and I moved to the floor instead. My chest felt heavy, and for the first time in years I cried. The tears didn't come all at once. They trickled out slowly at first, and then the weight of everything hit me and I broke down completely. I wasn't just mourning my marriage. I was mourning the version of Amy I thought I knew, the life we had built together. By the time I pulled myself together, hours had passed. The house felt cold, lifeless. I didn't know what to do, so I just sat there, staring at the dark TV screen, replaying everything in my mind. I had made her leave, but I wasn't sure what came next. Could I ever forgive her? Did I even want to? For now, all I knew was that I was alone, with the pain, the betrayal, and the silence. The next morning, I woke up on the couch, stiff and disoriented. For a moment, I forgot everything that had happened, but then it all came rushing back. The empty house was a harsh reminder that nothing would ever be the same again. I forced myself to get up, though every part of me wanted to stay in bed and shut the world out. I hadn't eaten since the confrontation, but the thought of food made my stomach churn. Instead, I poured myself a coffee and stared out the kitchen window, wondering how I had ended up here. Amy's absence was palpable. Her coffee mug still sat on the counter from the day before, and her favorite blanket was draped over the armchair in the living room. Little things like that made the house feel like a ghost of its former self. I wanted to get rid of everything that reminded me of her, but I couldn't bring myself to touch it yet. By mid-morning, I decided I needed to do something, anything, to keep my mind from spiraling. I texted Greg, the private investigator, and thanked him for his help. He offered to dig deeper into Marcus, but I declined. What would be the point? I had all the proof I needed. Next, I called my best friend Brian. He'd been my rock through every major life event, and I knew he'd be honest with me. When he picked up, I couldn't even get the words out before breaking down. "John, what's going on, man?" Brian asked, concern clear in his voice. "She cheated," I finally managed. "Amy, she cheated on me." There was a long pause on the other end. "What? Amy? Are you serious?" I explained everything, the late nights, the footage, the hotel photos. Brian listened quietly, letting me vent. By the time I finished, I felt a little lighter, like I wasn't carrying the weight of it all alone anymore. "I'm so sorry, John," he said. "You don't deserve this. She doesn't deserve you." His words were comforting, but they didn't take away the ache in my chest. "What do I do now?" I asked. "You take it one day at a time," he said. "And if you need anything, anything at all, you call me." After we hung up, I felt a small spark of hope. Maybe I could get through this even if it felt impossible right now. The rest of the day was a blur. I cleaned the house, trying to erase any trace of Amy and Marcus. I threw out the wine glasses they'd used and the blanket she always wrapped herself in. It was cathartic in a way, but it also felt like I was throwing away pieces of my life. By evening, I was exhausted, both physically and emotionally. I sat down with a beer and scrolled through my phone, only to see a text from Amy. "Amy, I just want to know if you're okay. Please let me explain everything." I stared at the message for a long time, debating whether to respond. Part of me wanted to hear her out, to understand why she had done this to me. But another part of me, the part that was still raw and angry, didn't want to give her the satisfaction. In the end, I left her on read. That night, I slept in the guest room. I couldn't bring myself to lie in the bed we had shared for so many years. The thought of her there, smiling at Marcus, laughing at his jokes, made my skin crawl. As I lay in the unfamiliar bed, staring at the ceiling, I made a promise to myself. I would get through this. Maybe not tomorrow or even next week, but eventually. Amy had taken so much from me, but she wouldn't take my future. The next few days felt like walking through a fog. I kept myself busy, cleaning, organizing, anything to keep my mind off Amy and Marcus. Every time I stopped moving, the memories came rushing back. Amy's smile as she let him in, the way she looked at him, her tears when I confronted her. The silence in the house was oppressive. I'd always enjoyed my alone time, but this was different. It wasn't peace, it was emptiness. The kind that echoed every time I glanced at the empty side of the bed or opened the closet to see her clothes still hanging there. On the third day, Brian showed up unannounced. He didn't say much, just dropped off a six-pack and sat on the couch with me. We didn't even talk about Amy for the first hour. Instead, he rambled about his work drama and a bad date he'd had recently. It was exactly what I needed, a reminder that life outside my little bubble of misery still existed. Eventually, though, the conversation circled back. "You've got to figure out your next move, man," Brian said. "You can't let her keep you stuck here." I nodded, even though I wasn't sure what that next move was. "I don't even know where to start. She's still texting me, Brian. Saying she wants to talk." He frowned. "You haven't responded, have you?" "No," I said quickly. "But part of me... I don't know. I keep thinking maybe I should, just to hear her out." Brian leaned forward, his tone serious. "John, I get it. You want closure, but what's she really going to say? She cheated. She lied. What else do you need to know?" He was right, of course. I didn't need more excuses or half-hearted apologies. I needed to move on. That night, I made a decision. I grabbed a box and started packing up Amy's things. Her clothes, her books, the little knickknacks she collected over the years, it all went into the box. Every item I touched brought a fresh wave of pain, but I forced myself to keep going. By the time I was done, the house felt even emptier, but it also felt cleaner. Like I was finally starting to reclaim it. The next morning, I sent Amy a text. "I packed up your things. Let me know when you can pick them up." Her response came quickly. "Can we talk when I come by? Please." I stared at the screen, my chest tightening. Every part of me wanted to say no, but something stopped me. Maybe it was curiosity, or maybe I just wanted to see her one last time and prove to myself that I could face her without breaking. "Fine," I replied. Amy showed up later that afternoon, looking worse than I'd ever seen her. Her hair was disheveled and her eyes were puffy, like she hadn't slept in days. She stood on the porch, clutching her keys, her gaze fixed on the ground. "Can I come in?" she asked softly. I stepped aside, letting her in without a word. She glanced around the house, her eyes lingering on the empty spots where her things used to be. "You packed everything already," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. I nodded. "I thought it'd be easier this way." Amy sat down on the couch and for a moment neither of us said anything. Then she looked up at me, her eyes brimming with tears. "I'm so sorry, John. For everything." I folded my arms, keeping my distance. "Why, Amy? Why did you do it?" She wiped at her face, struggling to find the words. "I don't know. I was lonely, I guess. Things felt different between us and I didn't know how to fix it." I shook my head, anger bubbling up again. "So you went to Marcus instead of talking to me?" "I know it was wrong," she said quickly. "I knew it even while it was happening, but he made me feel wanted. Like I was special again." Her words cut deep, but I didn't let it show. "Do you love him?" I asked bluntly. Amy's eyes widened and she shook her head. "No. It wasn't like that. It was stupid and I ended it. I swear I ended it before you found out." I laughed bitterly. "Yeah, after 6 months of sneaking around behind my back." She flinched, tears streaming down her face. "I know I don't deserve your forgiveness, but I need you to know how sorry I am. Losing you is the worst thing that's ever happened to me." I wanted to believe her. Part of me even felt sorry for her. But the damage was done. "I don't know what you want me to say, Amy," I said, my voice hollow. "You made your choice. Now you have to live with it." Amy broke down, sobbing into her hands. I stood there, unsure what to do. A part of me wanted to comfort her, to tell her everything would be okay. But I couldn't. Not after everything she'd done. Eventually she pulled herself together and stood up. "Thank you for letting me talk," she said quietly. I'll text you about picking up the rest of my things." I nodded, not trusting myself to speak. As she walked out the door, I felt a strange mix of relief and sadness. This chapter of my life was finally closing, but it still hurt. After Amy left, the house felt heavier than before, like her presence lingered in the air. I sat on the couch for hours, staring at the door she had walked out of, waiting for some kind of epiphany, but nothing came. I felt stuck between the pain of betrayal and the fear of starting over. As much as I hated what Amy had done, part of me still mourned the life we had built together. It wasn't just her I'd lost, it was the future I thought we'd have. The next day Brian came over again, this time with takeout and a six-pack. "You can't sit here forever," he said, handing me a box of greasy burgers and fries. "You've got to start living your life again." "I don't even know where to start," I admitted. He shrugged. "One day at a time. Start small. Get out of the house. Go for a walk. Hell, go out and scream into the void if you have to." I chuckled despite myself. Brian always had a way of cutting through the noise. The first step I took was cleaning. I don't mean just tidying up, I mean gutting the place. I boxed up anything that reminded me of Amy. Photos, souvenirs, even the throw pillows she'd picked out. I dropped the boxes off at a storage unit, telling myself I'd deal with them later. Next, I rearranged the furniture. It sounds silly, but it made a difference. The house didn't feel like our home anymore, it started to feel like my space. A few days later, Brian convinced me to join him for a drink at our favorite bar. I wasn't in the mood, but I knew I couldn't hide forever. As we sat at the bar, I realized how much I'd let my world shrink over the years. Amy and I had gotten so wrapped up in our routines that I'd lost touch with a lot of people. Seeing familiar faces at the bar, people I hadn't spoken to in months, was a reminder that there was still a life outside the mess I was in. One of those faces belonged to Sarah, a mutual friend I hadn't seen in years. She waved me over, her smile warm and inviting. "John. It's been forever," she said, pulling me into a quick hug. "Yeah, it has," I said, trying to match her enthusiasm. We caught up for a bit, and for the first time in weeks I found myself genuinely smiling. Sarah didn't ask about Amy, and I was grateful for that. It felt good to talk about something other than my failed marriage. By the end of the night I felt lighter, like a small piece of the weight had been lifted off my shoulders. It wasn't much, but it was a start. Over the next couple of weeks I focused on rebuilding. I threw myself into work, picking up extra projects to keep my mind busy. I also started hitting the gym again, something I hadn't done consistently in years. It wasn't easy. There were days when the pain felt unbearable, when the memories of Amy and Marcus would creep in and threaten to pull me under. But each time I reminded myself that I was moving forward, even if it was one step at a time. Then one evening I got a text from Amy. "Amy, I just wanted to check in. I hope you're doing okay." I stared at the message for a long time, torn between anger and sadness. Part of me wanted to reply, to let her know how much she'd hurt me, but another part knew there was no point. In the end, I didn't respond. Instead, I went for a run, a habit I'd picked up recently. As I pushed myself down the familiar streets of our neighborhood, I felt a strange sense of clarity. Amy's chapter in my life was closing, and for the first time, I felt like I could see a future without her. The weeks that followed were a strange mix of progress and setbacks. Some days I felt almost normal, like I was starting to reclaim my life. Other days, the pain of what Amy had done hit me out of nowhere, leaving me angry and exhausted. One of the hardest parts was dealing with the memories. Every corner of the house felt like it held a piece of her. A laugh shared over dinner, a lazy Sunday on the couch, whispered plans for the future. No matter how much I cleaned, rearranged, or packed away, the memories stayed. One day, while going through a drawer in the living room, I found an old photo album Amy had made for our 5th anniversary. It was full of snapshots from our early days together, our first road trip, holiday dinners, our wedding day. She'd written little captions beneath each photo, her handwriting cheerful and full of love. I sat on the floor, flipping through the pages, unable to stop myself. Each photo felt like a punch to the gut. How could someone who had loved me so much betray me like this? Was it all a lie? By the time I reached the end of the album, I was a mess. I wanted to throw it across the room, to burn it, to erase every trace of her. But instead, I closed it gently and put it back in the drawer. I wasn't ready to let it go, not yet. That night, I texted Brian. Me, do you think people can really change? Brian, depends on the person. Why? Me, I found some old photos of Amy and me. I can't stop wondering if she meant any of it. Brian, listen man, I get it. But you can drive yourself crazy asking those questions. The only thing you need to focus on is what's best for you now. Not her. You. Brian's words stuck with me. For so long I'd been stuck in the past, trying to make sense of Amy's choices. Maybe it was time to stop looking back and start thinking about what came next. A few days later, Amy texted me again, this time asking if we could meet to talk. Amy, I just need to say some things. Please. I stared at the message for a long time, debating whether to respond. Part of me wanted to hear her out to get some kind of closure. But another part knew it might just reopen old wounds. In the end, I agreed. Not because I thought it would change anything, but because I wanted to make sure I'd said everything I needed to say too. We met at a quiet cafe downtown, a place we used to go to all the time. Seeing her sitting at our old table was surreal, like stepping into a memory I didn't want to relive. Amy looked nervous, her hands wrapped around her coffee cup like it was the only thing grounding her. Thank you for coming, she said softly. I nodded, not trusting myself to speak yet. She took a deep breath and started talking. She apologized again, said all the things I'd already heard. How sorry she was, how much she regretted everything, how she didn't know why she'd done it. But then she said something that caught me off guard. I was scared, John, she admitted. Scared of losing myself. Scared that I wasn't enough for you anymore. I frowned. What are you talking about? I never gave you any reason to feel that way. I know, she said quickly. It wasn't you. It was me. Watching you succeed, seeing you so confident and sure of yourself. I started to feel like I didn't belong in your life anymore. Like I was holding you back. Her words hit me like a slap. I'd spent so much time blaming her, I hadn't considered the possibility that her actions came from her own insecurities. It didn't excuse what she'd done, but it made me see her in a different light. I loved you, Amy, I said quietly. I would have done anything for you. If you felt that way, why didn't you just talk to me? She looked down at her coffee, her voice barely audible. I don't know. I guess I was scared you'd agree. The conversation went on for another hour, and by the end I felt drained but strangely lighter. I didn't forgive her, and I didn't think I ever would. But for the first time I felt like I could understand her, not justify her actions but understand them. As we parted ways, Amy asked if we could stay in touch. I shook my head. I can't do that, I said firmly. I need to move on, and I can't do that if you're still in my life. She nodded, tears in her eyes. I hope someday you'll find someone who makes you happy, John. You deserve that. I didn't respond. I just walked away, leaving her and the weight of our past behind me. Walking away from Amy that day felt like the final chapter of a book I never wanted to write. For the first time, I wasn't weighed down by questions or what-ifs. Her apology didn't erase the pain, but it gave me clarity. That evening, I blocked her number and deleted her from my contacts. It wasn't an act of anger, it was a necessity. If I was going to move forward, I couldn't keep one foot in the past. I spent the next few days focusing on myself. I went for long runs, started cooking meals from scratch, and even signed up for a class at the community center, something I'd always wanted to do but never made time for. It wasn't easy, but every small step felt like progress. The house, once a place of heartbreak, slowly started to feel like mine again. I rearranged the furniture one more time, added a few personal touches, and for the first time in weeks I felt a sense of peace. The chapter with Amy was over. Now it was time to figure out who I was without her. Life didn't suddenly become easier after cutting ties with Amy, but it started to feel more manageable. The weight of her betrayal no longer consumed every waking moment. Instead, I focused on small victories, completing tasks, reaching out to friends, and carving out a routine that felt like mine. One of the best decisions I made was joining that community center class, a photography workshop. It was something I'd always been curious about, and now I had the time and space to explore it. The first session was intimidating, surrounded by strangers, but soon I found myself immersed in the creative process. Photography became an unexpected outlet for everything I couldn't put into words. The lens gave me a way to see the world differently, to notice beauty in the small, overlooked details. It was therapeutic, even if I didn't realize it at first. My social circle also started to expand. Through the class, I met people who didn't know me as John, the guy whose wife cheated on him. They just knew me as John, the guy learning to take decent photos. It was refreshing, a reminder that I could still be more than the sum of my pain. One evening after class, a woman named Rachel approached me. She was warm and easy to talk to, with a quick wit that caught me off guard. We chatted for a while about the project we were working on, and before I knew it, we'd agreed to grab coffee the following week to brainstorm ideas. I didn't know if it was the start of something new or just a friendship, but it didn't matter. What mattered was that, for the first time in a long while, I was looking forward to something again. Things were finally starting to settle into a rhythm. Between work, photography, and reconnecting with friends, I felt like I was rebuilding my life piece by piece. For once, my days weren't consumed by thoughts of Amy or the pain she'd caused. Then, out of nowhere, I received an email. The subject line read, "I just need you to know." It was from Amy. I stared at the screen, my pulse quickening. I'd blocked her everywhere, but I hadn't considered email. My first instinct was to delete it without reading, but curiosity got the better of me. Against my better judgment, I opened it. The message was long, a mix of apology and reflection. She said she'd started therapy and realized how much damage her choices had caused, not just to me but to herself as well. She admitted that she'd been unhappy long before Marcus entered the picture, but she hadn't been brave enough to confront those feelings or share them with me. She wrote about how much she regretted losing me and how she hoped I was finding happiness, even if it wasn't with her. The part that struck me most was her final line. "I don't expect forgiveness, and I know we'll never go back to what we were. But I hope one day when you think of me it doesn't hurt so much." I closed the email, unsure how to feel. Her words didn't change anything, but they left me with an odd sense of closure. For the first time, I believed she truly understood the weight of what she'd done. I didn't respond. Instead, I forwarded the email to a folder labeled Pass and closed my laptop. That night I went for a long walk, letting the cool air clear my head. I realized that while the pain was still there, it wasn't as sharp as it once was. Amy's message felt like the final stone I needed to lay down to move forward. The next day, I kept my coffee date with Rachel. I didn't bring up the email or my past with Amy. For the first time, I didn't feel the need to. My coffee meeting with Rachel turned out to be more enjoyable than I expected. What started as a casual brainstorming session about our photography projects soon drifted into conversations about life, passions, and the little things that made us both tick. Rachel had this way of making everything feel lighter, easier. She shared stories about her chaotic family gatherings and her dreams of traveling to obscure corners of the world with just a camera and a backpack. Her enthusiasm was infectious, and for the first time in what felt like forever, I caught myself laughing, really laughing. We stayed at the cafe for hours, long after our cups were empty, and when we finally parted ways, she gave me a smile that lingered in my mind long after she left. Over the next few weeks, we started spending more time together, sometimes with others from the class, sometimes just the two of us. It wasn't romantic, not yet, but it was something. A friendship that felt genuine, unburdened by the weight of my past. One evening, Rachel and I decided to explore an old park on the edge of town, cameras slung over our shoulders. The place was quiet, with overgrown paths and hidden nooks that seemed made for photos. We spent hours snapping shots, comparing our work, and joking about whose was better. As the sun began to set, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink, Rachel turned to me with a thoughtful look. "You've been through a lot, haven't you?" she asked, her voice soft. I hesitated, unsure how much to share. "Yeah," I admitted. It's been a rough few months. She nodded as if she already knew. Well, for what it's worth, I think you're doing a pretty good job of putting yourself back together. Her words hit me harder than I expected. I wasn't sure if I believed her, but hearing it from someone else made me feel like maybe, just maybe, I was on the right path. That night, as I looked through the photos we'd taken, I felt a sense of peace I hadn't known in months. The pictures weren't perfect, but they were mine. Each one felt like a small step forward, a piece of the new life I was building. For the first time since everything with Amy, I felt something close to hope. The months that followed felt like a slow, steady thaw. Life didn't magically fall into place, but the pieces began to take shape in a way that felt new and exciting. Rachel and I grew closer, though it wasn't a whirlwind romance. We took our time learning about each other, building a connection that felt solid and unforced. She never pressured me to talk about my past, but when I did, she listened without judgment. One evening, we sat on a park bench after one of our photography outings, watching the city lights flicker in the distance. Do you ever think about starting over? I asked, breaking the comfortable silence. Rachel glanced at me, a small smile playing on her lips. Every day. But I think starting over doesn't mean forgetting the past. It just means not letting it define you. Her words stayed with me. For so long, I'd let my pain and betrayal define who I was. But slowly, I was learning that there was more to me than the scars Amy had left behind. One weekend, Rachel and I planned a trip to a nearby state park. It was her idea, a chance to escape the city and immerse ourselves in nature. We hiked, took hundreds of photos, and sat around a small campfire at night, sharing stories about our lives. As the fire crackled and the stars came out, I realized how far I'd come since the day Amy walked out of my life. The pain was still there, but it had softened, no longer consuming me. Rachel noticed me staring into the flames and nudged me with her elbow. What's on your mind? I hesitated for a moment, then smiled. That I'm lucky. I never thought I'd feel like this again. She tilted her head, curious. Like what? Hopeful, I said simply. She smiled back, and in that moment, I knew I was ready to embrace whatever came next. Life wasn't perfect, but it didn't have to be. I had my work, my photography, and Rachel. Most importantly, I had myself, a version of me that was stronger, wiser, and ready to move forward. The past was a part of my story, but it no longer defined me. For the first time in a long time, I felt free.